Hello, and welcome to our fourth and final practice for drawing pencil. This is our last practice before you complete your post-test, which is going to be next to your pre-test on the front of this page. I want to make sure that as we are working on this final sphere, that if you have any questions, that you call me over as we are watching this video so that I can help you work through any problems you might be having until we get to the evidence of growth practice, which will be next class. So we are going to get set up with our same pencils. We need a hard leaded pencil, so an HB or a 3B. We need a soft leaded pencil like a 5B or a 6B, and then you need a blending stump. We are going to get started by turning our paper, and we're going to divide our value scale, so we're drawing those lines coming out. We want to divide that section in half, then in half once more, then in half again, with a total of 8. We are going to turn this back and label it from 0 to 7, 0 at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now I like to turn my paper back, and today's practice is all about having smooth texture. So our focus today is all about using small circles. So as you are working today, when we're filling in this first one, I want you to really be thinking, am I using lines right now, or am I using small circles? And I am going to be focusing on that very heavily too. So we are working on this together. So we're filling in value number 7, solid black. We are going to just continue on to 6, and we're making that just slightly lighter. We don't want to have like an actual line dividing them, so we want to help them blend together. Now for value 5, we're pressing even lighter. Something that can be helpful is to hop down to value 3, and this is like the lightest we can color with a pencil, our 6B pencil or 5B, and then we're just kind of bridging the gap for value 4. So we kind of want to just take this lightest value and let it meet in the middle so that we're helping that to transition from one value to the next. So we want to have a nice smooth transition, and we're using those small circles. Keep that in mind as you're working through this. And I'm just going to go back up and kind of add another layer to help really even out the texture, because that is our focus today. So we're just going back up and adding another layer of small circles just directly on top of what we already did. And this is just to kind of help even out any lines or grains or texture that you might have. We are going to pick up with our blending stump, clean it off on the side in case it is extra dark. It won't ever get completely clean, but you can kind of twist it around until it starts to get lighter. We're going to start with value 1, which is like the lightest you can make it. And we want to have a nice transition into white, so don't fill the 0. We want that to stay white. For value 2, I'm just going to press harder with my blending stump, and that should give you enough to just make that small transition. And then we're starting on the lighter end of our value scale and working our way up. We are using small circles with our blending stump as well. And now we're just going to go back through and use our blending stump to make sure that it's nice and even. Now, to help us with our texture for this, I want you to pick up your HB pencil now. This is our third layer, and we are just looking for any patches that might be slightly lighter than the rest, and we want to make everything match. I would recommend not going past value 3 too much with your HB, just because it might show some lines, but we are just helping these values to blend together, and I'm filling in the little gaps on the side to make sure I don't leave any white spaces. I'll give you a second to work on this, and remember, today is texture perfecting. We want smooth texture, so we are super focused on having nice smooth transitions and 0 grainy marks left behind. If you added a big layer with your HB, you can always soften it again once more with your blending stump, just to make sure it is as smooth as you can possibly make it. All right. Next, we are going to spin our paper back, and we are going to find the outermost edge of our sphere. We're going to draw a line coming straight down and straight across. We are going to connect these two spots, and we're going to just make a slight curve when we do that. Now there's a little gap here, and we want to make like that same amount of space just slightly above the tabletop line so that the table line is in the middle and we have even amounts of space between these two dots. Now we're going to connect this dot down to our first original point right in the middle. This is the triangle that we're going to start with shading, so make sure you've got your soft leaded pencil, and we're going to start by filling in the edge of this triangle solid black so that it's shiny, and then we are going to continue pressing lighter and lighter and lighter, filling in this triangle. We want to have nice smooth transitions, all about that texture today. Now we're going to fill in the highlight with a small value scale, and we want to fade out to value 3. We don't want to leave white down here at the bottom because we don't actually see white, but we are fading out and getting lighter as we work our way towards the bottom of the sphere. Next, we're going to make our value scale going outwards, and remember this eyeball shape. I want you all to pause and watch the board. We are trying to build this shape. So see where this eyeball connects. I want you to be thinking about that, and now I want you to make a mark right where that value is going to end so that you can kind of imagine where your eyeball shape is going to be. So make this mark right about here, and sometimes it's helpful to draw the line on your reference photo so that you can make sure that you're going up to that right spot. Now we're going to start on this darkest edge, and we want to just go right over that line and continue adding little circles until that edge disappears. And we're going to help that fade out to white. And then over here, we are bringing this value up, and we're using a value 3, like the lightest you can color with a pencil. And we're just kind of building up that eyeball shape. So we're lifting the corners to help build that eyeball. It's a funny thing to say. Don't usually build eyeballs very often. But we are going to continue adding that shading, and then we're going to stop and switch to our blending stump to add our lightest values. Now I'm going to clean my blending stump off quite a lot. We want this to not start out too dark, and I'm going to go directly above where I drew, and I left a little bit of space before I got to that dot so that I could come in and add this light layer. I want you to pause where you're at, and I want you to notice, look up at the board, and see this little gap. I left that gap so that I wouldn't accidentally start out too dark. And now that I've got that fading out to white nice and smoothly, I am going to just continue pushing a little bit harder like we did for value 2. We just push a little harder with our blending stump, and then we're starting on our lighter end, and we're blending into the dark. So I'm going to skip over that triangle that we added our darkest values to, and I'm going to do the highlight first. Then I'm going to start on the lighter end of this triangle, and using little circles, I am blending out that value. And I'm just helping it kind of blend all the way up. I can clean my blending stump off again as I start to fade back out to these lighter values so that I can make sure that I have a nice smooth transition out to white. This is the hardest part. We keep talking about that. So I really want you to take your time here, and we're just working on blending it out with our blending stump. Now our focus again is smooth texture. So we're going to come back in with our HB. Once you are done smoothing with your blending stump, you're going to come back in with your HB pencil, and you are just kind of filling in any patches that might be slightly lighter or that like stand out as different texture from the rest of our sphere. Take a look at the reference photo and make sure that you are matching the angle of that eyeball. So I'm going to kind of lift my edge of my curve up a little bit so that I can help that to blend out and match my reference photo as much as possible. So take your time here. We want to really spend a lot of time because this is your last practice and a smooth texture focus. So we really want to make sure that this has a smooth texture. And if you want to come back through with your blending stump, you can. Make sure you clean it off if you're going into that light space. We really want to have a nice transition into white, and if you've got too much on your blending stump, that can make it even more challenging to blend this out. I'm using small little circles as we're perfecting. If you see any sections, you can just set your blending stump right on top of that section and make small little circles as you work your way along that edge. So really spend some quality time here. This is our last practice. All right. We are going to move on. So we're going to start by giving ourselves just an outline of this sphere. I would like for you to turn your paper as you do it so that you can see if you're coloring up against the edge of that sphere or not. We want to stretch this line out just a little bit past where that triangle started. And we're filling that triangle with solid black. You should check to make sure that it is shiny. Next, we're going to draw the outside edge of this shadow, and it is going to curve as it reaches the outside edge here, but it does go off of this rectangle. We're going to start with super dark, and it's going to be solid and almost completely black until we get to the very end where it does start to get lighter. And remember, as you're filling, use tiny circles. No lines here, just circles. Next, we are going to fill in our tabletop, and we begin by giving ourselves the outline for our sliver of highlight along that tabletop edge. We're using small circles to fill in a number 4 value. We want that to be nice and even. You also want your shadow to stand out, so make sure that you're not coloring your tabletop too dark. And to give ourselves the border here, I'm going to spin my paper and just give myself a little border along the outside edge of my sphere. Make sure it's nice and crisp and that I don't have any white gaps left up against my sphere. Turning it back. And just adding in the rest of my number 4 value. We're using small circles to fill that in. Remember that we are trying to focus on our texture. Don't use lines here. Sometimes it's tricky to not get caught up and start going back to habits that you've had. But we are using small circles to fill. We're going to give ourselves a border along the top edge, and we're switching to a darker value, about like a 6. Not quite shiny, but pretty dark. We don't want it to be quite as dark as our shadow. And I'm turning my paper so that I can see right when my pencil lead touches the outside of that circle. We want to border the circle and the rectangle. I'm going to turn it the other way to border this side of the rectangle. And because I'm right-handed, I always turn my paper so that I can color on the right side of the line, because that means that I can see if it's touching the outside edge because my pencil lead is not in the way. Now I'm going to continue filling with my small circles. Oops. Colored into my sphere a little bit there. Have to fix that. That's why those borders are so helpful. Usually they keep you from doing that. So we just want this to be as even as possible. We're using those small circles. Okay, now we are going to switch to our blending stump. And we start with our tabletop. We're using the side of our blending stump rather than the point. We're going to use this chance to make those highlights even skinnier. We want them to be as skinny as we can get them while still staying white. We're blending out our shadow as well, blending along that bottom edge of our shadow, then continuing to the other side of the tabletop. Making that highlight as skinny as we can get it. Then we're going along the background, blending with the side of our blending stump and getting rid of all of that grainy texture. Then we want to turn our paper. Now, I do have this little mistake that I made where I kind of drew into my sphere, so I can just kind of use my blending stump to help me, or I can even erase a little bit if needed, and just kind of come back in with my blending stump to help perfect that. Now, I noticed that I did leave my highlight a little too light. I need to come in and just kind of make that match the reference photo a little bit more. I'm just double checking to make sure that I've got everything blended out. And the next and final step is to take your HB pencil, and we're just going to go along and fill any of the remaining patches that are uneven. We're looking for any of those little sections or spaces that might be light up against the outside edge of things, like along the outside edge of your rectangle, right up against your sphere. We're looking for any areas where it might have been just like missed a little bit. We also want to look for any sections that just need a little bit more value, maybe those light patches. We're also looking at our reference photo, so take a look at your reference photo and make sure that you are matching this as closely as you can. Make sure that your eyeball shape has a good amount of curve, that your values come up to the right location. So spend some time working on perfecting, and this is your final practice. So after this, you are going to be working on your evidence of growth. So if you want to ask any questions, now would be a great time to call me over so that I can help walk you through some of your problems and help you solve them before you are working on your evidence of growth. All right, thank you guys for watching.